Let's paint an easy breezy seascape, a nice rolling wave with rocks. We'll make it loose and dynamic and exciting. Take the mystery out of where to start. We'll know where we're going and we'll stop overworking. My name's Annika. We're going to work out a composition from a photo and then we'll do the tonal sketch and then we'll do the painting. So hop on board and let's do it. With a bit of planning, your painting process can be deliberate, confident, and stress-free. To do this, we have 5 main components. There's composition, tonal value sketch, choosing the colors, planning the process, and then finally waiting for the layers to dry during painting. Did you know back in the day, compositions were stories? So let's have a look at the story I'd like to tell. Your story might be different, and that's the beauty of art. You need to ask yourself, what do you like the most out of everything you see? And that can become the focal point. For me, it's the eye and the roll of the wave that really gets my attention, so that's where the focus needs to be. A few too many rocks, I think I'll only keep 3. I had a bit of a play in Photoshop and made one of the rocks dunked into water. Now let's see how we can sketch this out. I start my composition with the focal point because it's the most important part. Then everything else can work its way around it. I'm looking at the wave and the way it rises and then tips over, all in an anti-clockwise direction, at least from this angle. And that's very important to know how the roll rolls. The direction of the falling water is like this. Just to develop this focal point a bit more, it's important to note that the rolling wave has only come halfway down the wave, so it hits the rising wave on a slope and foams up. So now that we have the focal point sorted, we look at all the other elements, and this is where the magic happens because they all have to work hard to support this special area. And this is done through leading lines. See the foam? The edge of the foam goes from the corner of the painting towards the focal point. Now we can strategically place the 3 rocks. The first is in the focal area, and then one off towards the left. This is the one that's semi-submerged. And then there'll be one in the front. And I'll explain my thinking. Because we have a focal point, which is this in the painting, we want everything else in the painting to support it, to tell the story that on this particular day, there was a bit of a haze happening and the hills in the background were a little bit misty or so. And then we had a sunlit wave and we had a few rocks in the foreground. This rock over here is shaped like this, so that this particular leading edge points towards the focal point. Any main line that is drawn or painted heads towards the focal point. So this particular line that I have here, I could say, well, no, it's pointing too far up, and I could erase it and I could just do that. And then with our hills in the background, there may be some suggestion in the painting that the lines come down like this and point towards the focal point. And this might be through a little bit of perhaps the underpainting showing through, just any little mark that will help to guide the eye towards the focal point. The goal is to keep their attention within the painting. And then we have the tonal study, where we decide what's going to be light, medium, or dark. And just looking at this, I know that this foamy area in here, plus the top edge of the rolling wave and the foam above it, these are the areas that will be the lightest. Now let's work out our lights, mediums and darks. Here is a little frame for my tonal value sketch. I would like the eye of the wave to be here, and little bits of this are going to be white. There's the wave, and here it's also white. This is simplified. Then all the rest is actually medium if it's not dark. So if we were to color this in, as in, I'll try to do it nicely. So I've just left out the white bits because this will really help me keep me on track. If you take the time to work out these broad areas, your whole painting process will change. You've done all the hard work already and you know where things are going to go, so applying the paint will actually be fun instead of stressful. So there is everything that's light and this is white. Now we can move into the next section, which is, darker. It's going to be the mountains. Make the wave darker. I'm just gradually darkening things. And I'm taking a darker color now for the water, really a little bit darker. There's the water behind, the water in the foreground. And now I can put my darkest bits in, which are the rocks. And I can, based on what we said before, have a rock pointing to the wave. And so all roads lead to Rome and all lines lead to the wave. I think I can work with this. How are you finding it? Can you work with it? Squinting helps, or taking a photo and converting it to black and white on your phone. That can help too, just to help you see what's lighter and what's darker, and if you need to change it. I know this is already more than 3 tones, but you do it the way you want to do it. See what is darker and what is lighter. I've drawn out the sketch as we've planned it earlier, and I also have this sketch available for you to download so that you can just start painting if you want to. Choosing colours is a big topic and worth its own video. In a nutshell, I go for the local colour of the focal point when I'm inspired by it, and then all the rest of the colours in the painting are harmonised with it. Today's colours are permanent alizarin, yellow ochre, lavender, cobalt blue, nickel titanate yellow, cascade green, Australian turquoise and burnt sienna. Now let's talk about the process. We'd like to paint this in 3 layers. Firstly, we'll be omitting the whites and then waiting for everything to dry, and then we'll be doing all the midtones, and lastly, touching it up and adding some dark tones. The first thing I'd like to do though is mask out the whites. To do this, I've pulled out a few extra holes out of a little sponge. This can be a kitchen sponge or a toy sponge or any type of sponge. And then I've cut it in half, creating one straight edge. The straight edge has allowed me to work around the rocks. I'm using an old hog bristle brush that I've rubbed into some soap and then applying this to the very top of the wave and a jagged line across the rest of the wave and a few little bits and pieces here and there. And this goes along with the plan that we've already made of masking out the whites. With the brush, I'm also building up the leading edge of the foam in front of the wave because it's a little bit bulkier. And just a few little bits and bobs here and there. For the first layer, I'm mixing thin tea-like consistencies of all the colours that I'll be needing for the first layer. These include a small pool of permanent alizarin, a big pool of cobalt blue, and another pool of nickel titanate yellow with some Australian turquoise for the very light wash of sunny light green in the wave. I'm testing to see that the masking fluid has fully dried and then placing a roll of masking tape underneath my board just to have it tilted a little bit. The goal here is to cover the whole sheet of paper with a thin layer of paint except for the white bits. I'm starting with a variegated wash, starting at the top with my cobalt blue and then adding a little bit of alizarin, which turns out to be a little bit too light, so I add a little bit more paint to it. And then also add a teeny touch of nickel titanate yellow to the red to make it a little bit warmer. I don't wash my brush and go for the blue, which now has a little bit of red in it. I'm keeping my variegated wash nice and wet and keeping the bead alive. Having the paper tilted, the paint runs down the page, creating a bead, and this helps to keep the wash nice and smooth and also keeps my brush wet and keeps the whole wash flowing. I'm painting everything for now except the middle of the wave, to which I'll be adding the light green colour. I've decided to keep the light green for the second wash. I need to dry my brush and mop up any little leftover beads, then soften the blue edges in the middle of the wave. Finally, I take a clean damp tissue and wipe over the spray of the waves to avoid any harsh lines from the masking fluid. Now it's time for the first layer to dry completely. I'm briefly using the hairdryer, but mostly letting it dry naturally. The layer is now dry and I'm pre-wetting the top of the wave again where the foamy spray is, just so that I can lift it again later. I'm mixing a milky consistency of cobalt blue and a little bit of alizarin crimson. It's a little too blue, so just another little dash of the crimson. That's better, and this is now for the hills in the background. I'm painting the hills, but on purpose leaving a few little gaps of the underlying paint showing through, and these little lines will help with the composition, just like we spoke about earlier on. I'm adding a tiny touch of burnt sienna to this same blue mix for the ocean in the background. I'm careful also to leave a small sliver of shoreline at the back there. I'm hoping that the breakdown of this process really helps you, and so that you realize just how time saving it is to spend that time planning everything out. Even though you spend half your time thinking instead of painting, it really pays off in the end. Leave a comment below and let me know what your thoughts are. After using a damp tissue to wipe out the spray of the water again, I dry my brush and mix a thicker mix, a much more creamier mix of cobalt blue and burnt sienna, just to add a little distant rising wave in the background. It's time to pre-wet the wave and finally add the very light green. Into this same mix, I'm adding some Australian turquoise and a bit of Cascade green, but I notice that the paint is very wet, so I just blot up some of the paint with a tissue to make it drier. My paint needs to be a bit creamy. This green is now for the middle of the wave. For the very bottom of the wave, my paint is still too wet, so I blot up some more, add more Cascade Green and Yellow Ochre for a deep greeny ochre colour, which also reflects a little bit of sand. Part of the planning process is also testing the colours to make sure you have the right colour and apply it once instead of trying to fix it. I've learnt this the hard way. A little bit of tilting for some running magic. We're working our way down the second layer. So now I'm mixing a little bit of yellow ochre and lavender, and this will produce a very soft warm grey to go over the foam in the foreground, creating the holy texture of the foam. I'm now adding more lavender to this mix to create the shadowed foam beneath the main wave. I'm adding some thicker lavender to the left-hand side of the wave, and this suggests the reflection of the sky on the contour of the wave. And some on the right side too. With a creamy mix of Cascade Green and Yellow Ochre, I'm intensifying some parts of the wave with creamy paint on damp paper. And now it's time for it to dry. The painting is now fully dry and I can erase the masking fluid. I'm using what's known as a cement rubber. It just really picks up adhesives well and is a very handy thing to have. I had one in the drawer for years and I never knew what it was for. The top of the wave and all the masking fluid that's collected on the rubber can just easily be pulled away. We're finally at the roll of the wave and just doing some pencil work to remind me of where I need to go. I find that knowing a little bit about something that you're painting really helps you with the process. So about the wave. As a wave approaches the shore, the bottom of the wave begins to slow down as it hits the shallow seabed, but the top is still going fast until it hits its peak and then topples over, creating the beautiful mesmerizing roll. To create the roll, we paint a stripe of greeny blue across the top of the roll, leaving a tiny sliver of white between the roll and the background sea. Then you can use a fan brush or a splayed brush, whichever you prefer, to pull this paint down in the direction of the roll. So it's a little bit anti-clockwise and then down. If you look closely at a reference photo of the wave or just look at waves outside, you'll notice the green stripe and then also a bit of a white stripe before a darker stripe again. We have the green, the light, and then darker. So I'm just trying to erase a little bit in there and pull some lines through. To bring the wave to life, we need to add some shadows on this closer shadowed side of the wave. I'm doing this with lavender and a teeny touch of yellow ochre. I mentioned earlier that the roll of the wave needs a tiny sliver of white on its very top between the wave and the distant ocean. So that's why I need to add back a little bit of the background sea. A little more lavender at the base of the wave where it hits the contour of the wave, and spreading this over to the left hand side. I'm using the same color for a few more shadows under the foam. It's finally time for the rocks. I'm using a moist paper towel to gently dampen the wave so the edges aren't too harsh. I mix a creamy mix of cobalt blue and burnt sienna for the rocks, and just add a few broken lines suggesting the rocks, because this way they look a lot more organic and they're also connected to their background. I'll be using a palette knife on them to shape them, but I do need to wait for them to dry a little bit, just a little. About a minute later, I can scrape a bit and create beautiful effects for the rocks. Some more deeper green, cascade green and yellow ochre, and a teeny touch of burnt sienna, and I also stripe it over the rocks, suggesting the water flowing over them. A little bit of lavender and a teeny touch of yellow ochre for the cast shadow behind the rock. Just a few more broken lines in the water at the front, and we can call it a day. In the past, I would have fiddled more with all sorts of little things, but I think that we've got the feeling of the painting, and any extra little bits would just be too much. We've used a lot of different techniques in this video, and if you'd like to brush up on your skills of washes or have questions about your brushes or paper, check out my videos on Fix Your Washes or on the paper and see what might be happening.